Well, so I mean, one is to make a bet about where the future is going. I actually think, and partly building on something Jeremy said, I think one of the hardest parts of actually solving this, and Jeremy, I think very correctly said the word without permission. And I think one of the things we lose sight of is I think there's a lot of businesses that have very compelling solutions. You're hearing about some of them here, but governments matter. And we live in a world of government controlled. The financial systems in G20 markets are regulated in, I'm not even saying that's necessarily a bad thing or good thing. It just is. I don't think that's going to change in my lifetime. And one of the challenges, of course, here are core financial regulations like KYC, know your customer. And a regulator hears the expression without permission, they take a deep breath and they're like, wait a minute, no. If that's without permission, I need to know and make sure that that's not money laundering. I need to make sure that's not human trafficking. I need to make sure that's not drug X, Y, and Z. I need to make sure that's not terrorist financing. And I think, just regulatory frameworks are obviously there for a reason and to protect various aspects of society. But in this context, it actually is it's a point of friction that we should just be aware of. And I think if we try to proceed in a without permission, I worry that that we take one step forward, two steps back.
Hello and welcome to Crypto IQ. In today's video, the CEO of Ripple, Brad Garlinghouse, discusses the pros and cons of the global regulatory framework behind creating a central bank digital currency.
Point that jumps out at me the most is in a moment of crisis, these are the kinds of money movements that are the most critical to a population that is most fragile. The WEF's motto is about improving the world, and I think it's almost a tragedy that the people who can least afford it are the ones paying the most. Looking at your data, we can say that the mobile wallet at 1.7% and celebrate that that's much, much, much better. But I would ask the question of why isn't it 17 basis points? Money today is ones and zeros. You can send an email to anywhere in the world for effectively nothing. Why is it even 1.7%? And I think the good news is we can get there. There are hurdles, and more so than anything else, I think the hurdles is the incumbency of existing players, and I mean that as relates to corporates as well as governments, who sometimes don't always have a shared incentive of what's in the best interest of those populations that might be most fragile and in most need of those, in a moment of crisis, funds from loved ones, home, what have you. The thing to think about, I think, is if you approach the regulators with you need to adapt to us, I mean, that is dead on arrival. In my experience, and globally, and frankly, even here in Davos, meeting with financial regulators in all kinds of countries, I think we have to acknowledge. Ben Bernanke, the former head of the U.S. Fed, came to one of Ripple's customer events, and one of the things he said is, countries will not give up their ability to control monetary supply. They will roll tanks into the streets first because it's giving up sovereignty. Now, we can debate whether or not some countries at the longer tail ever had control of their money supply. But the G20, I think I agree with Jeremy that digital cash, cash is anonymous and private and all those things. But if you ever walk into the bank and ask to withdraw $20,000 of cash, they're going to ask you a lot of questions, at least in the United States and other G20 markets. Less about adapting, more understanding. People think that digital currencies are somehow more can circumvent. As Jeremy's described, digital currencies actually, in many ways, are more traceable and more trackable and more visible. And so, in some ways, I think governments should actually like it better. But I often will say I usually call crypto digital assets, or I don't usually say cryptocurrency because, for all intents and purposes, I think mostly it's not a currency in the kind of consumer definition of that, except for kind of some of the tail risk around in Argentina or Zimbabwe, where those governments have lost control of their currency multiple times. And if you're a wealthy person living in one of or even a middle of the road person living in one of those countries, I'd rather not hold the currency as opposed to a digital asset and maybe a USDC or a more traditionally defined digital asset. I completely agree with the question around is the automation, reg tech. If I were in the venture capital business, and to some degree, Ripple's invested in about 50 companies, so to some degree we are, I think reg tech is an underappreciated opportunity. The one risk, however, on that is that came to light as we work with a lot of banks around the world, is a bank saying to me, they won't accept another bank's KYC token, if you will. Just because you were KYC'd by one bank, you're going to get KYC'd by the bank you're sending to, because the risk of a bad KYC to the accepting bank is so high that they won't trust the other bank. That's one where it feels like, okay, maybe some of our regulatory frameworks could change, but I think you're right that reg tech's a huge investment opportunity. I think the number one thing, and certainly Jeremy won't be surprised to hear me say this, regulatory clarity, regulatory certainty. The U.S. is certainly behind other countries, but even some of the leading countries in this space, understanding how the businesses you operate in are going to be regulated by governments is critical to make investment as an entrepreneur, to start new companies. As a U.S. entrepreneur, when people ask me, they're thinking about starting a crypto company, I say don't incorporate in the United States because that's where it's somewhere between hostile and uncertain. And there's much better clarity in Japan and Singapore, here in Switzerland, to invest. And I think globally having more clarity, more certainty will help this innovation thrive, and it'll help remittances because of that.
So do you agree with Brad that digital assets are more transparent than cash and other fiat currencies? Let us know in the comments. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.